Hi everyone, Chad Goodman here, taking you on a deeper dive into the Elgin Symphony Orchestra's Classics 5 program, which we will be performing on April 5th and 6th at the Hemmings Cultural Center. The program opens with a bang with a piece written by composer Jimmy Lopez entitled Fiesta. This four-movement work takes influence from music of all around the world. Lopez describes how this piece is an exploration of how you can combine traditional European orchestral styles of writing music for a symphony orchestra with musical inspiration from Latin American music, Afro-Peruvian music, and pop music. Each of these short four movements explores a different musical style and voice. Something you'll hear consistent throughout that is really the heartbeat is the use of percussion. Congas and bongo drums are instruments that you will hear consistently, and they really chug things along and really drive the music and the orchestra in so many places. The piece, because it is this amalgamation of styles, is unlike anything I've heard. It's beautiful, it's catchy, it's challenging, it's so much fun to play and perform, and I really hope that that energy is something that all of you feel when you are at our performances, when you're listening. The second piece on the program, Tchaikovsky's iconic violin concerto. This concerto, like so many that we have performed recently, is part of the core repertoire, but at the time of its premiere was a failure. I just think this is always so fascinating, and I always like to bring this up because music takes time to be appreciated. Not everything is an overnight sensation, and a piece as iconic as Tchaikovsky's violin concerto, similar to Beethoven's violin concerto, which many of you heard on our Classics 4 program, was not loved immediately. Now, the critic who reviewed the premiere maybe had some grudges as well against Tchaikovsky, but he described this concerto as being a piece where the solo violin part basically is just played to death, that this instrument is just battered and it's just unnecessarily virtuosic and, too show-offy, and that the music just was not appealing, which for all of us who have known and loved this piece for more than a century since that premiere, it's absurd to even think you could hear it that way. Like, was this critic listening with the same set of ears? There's so much humanity and soul and passion in this concerto. It's difficult to think that at the time of its premiere, it was not well received. Now, when Tchaikovsky wrote the piece, he had a young soloist in mind, who, as Tchaikovsky was writing the piece and workshopping it with him, eventually told Tchaikovsky he wasn't comfortable with the piece. So Tchaikovsky went on to yet another soloist, who, upon looking at it, who was a much more famous soloist, said, I can't premiere this, it's unplayable. The solo part's it's literally impossible, which is something we also see throughout history, where the great virtuosi of a specific era would have deemed a new piece literally unplayable, too hard to play, which nowadays, people starting in their teens, violinists, will start working on the Tchaikovsky concerto and performing it. So it's just wild to see how technique has progressed over the years. Anyways, the premiere finally happens. The biggest, most powerful critic in the area just really tears the thing apart, and it kind of gets shelved. It's not something that instantly is being performed all over Europe or all around the world as Tchaikovsky would hope. But thankfully, to a resurgence in performances of this piece by other soloists, it did grow in popularity, right? It takes more than one performance of a piece for people to be able to really come to a conclusion. There's so much depth, and one pass at any given piece just simply doesn't do it justice. It isn't fair for people to write things off immediately. And in fact, we would see very quickly that by the time we enter the 20th century, the piece was already adored and was becoming a very common concerto heard. And nowadays, it's a top 5 concerto, which is a gateway piece for so many people into classical music, where they hear, a recording or a performance of this piece, and that's their first introduction to classical music. And it's a great way to enter, because this piece is just an absolutely spectacular work of art. The first movement, very bold, beautiful, long first movement. Brahms' violin concerto would have been premiered a few years earlier, and also a massive concerto with a very large first movement. Tchaikovsky's very similar, a large structure, opens with a beautiful and charming little short introduction in the orchestra, which, just like Tchaikovsky's famous and revered first piano concerto, does something similar, which is it introduces a gorgeous theme at the very top of the concerto and then never brings it back, which is just so puzzling and so wild to think about. Anyways, the orchestra sets things up, the solo violin enters, takes things, performs a cadenza, really sets the tone and the mood by themselves without the orchestra there to back them up. And then the orchestra joins in into what is some of the most beloved and memorable melodic tunes that we have in the classical music canon. The first movement builds to such an extraordinary climax. The ending of the first movement is so exhilarating that as performers, it feels like you're reaching the end of the last movement of a concerto, but it's just the first movement. And very often audiences will go ahead and just jump to their feet because it is just such a spectacular and energizing ending. And I encourage anyone who is at our performances, please clap after that first movement. I think it's almost wrong to try and stifle it, because there's so much liveliness and energy that comes that I think that release is really actually quite important. The second movement, the canzonetta, is a very intimate, beautiful, lyrical, more inward looking movement, much shorter in length and duration. And this leads directly into the third movement finale, which is a flash bang, incredibly virtuosic, lightning fast, and incredibly charming finale movement that just really propels everything to the end. It's such a dramatic ending. And even though I said that this piece is performed by people of all ages during these times, it's a piece that requires incredible technique, incredible sensitivity. And we're very lucky to be working with violin soloist Samuel Vargas on this performance. And Samuel is an incredibly gifted violin soloist, chamber musician, professor. He's a true entrepreneur in what he does. He has a foundation that helps provide string instruments and private lessons for children in underserved communities, starting in Venezuela, where he grew up, and really now it's expanded around the world. He brings music to so many people and to so many communities, and is just a really special individual. So the fact that we can have him joining us in Elgin for our performances of the Tchaikovsky Concerto, I have no doubt all of you will be blown away by his artistry, his sensitivity, and the soul with which he brings to all of his performances. The last piece on our program is Sibelius' Fifth Symphony. Sibelius is a very special composer to me. I have a deep connection with his music. The most famous composer to ever come out of Finland, really became the voice of Finland as the country was sort of finding itself and redefining itself. Russia had always been involved, and his voice, his musical voice, became sort of the voice of Finland. And his Fifth Symphony, like a lot of his other music, is often described in ways that people would describe Finnish culture and the Finnish landscape. There's a great beauty and an openness in his music that is often compared to taking a walk in nature in the countrysides in Finland, where he lived for most of his career, for about 50 years, the last 50 years of his life. He lived in the countryside with his wife in a little home, a little rustic home. And this is where he got his inspiration. It's where he wrote most of his symphonies, most of his orchestral output, including the Fifth Symphony, which, like so many pieces throughout history, was revised multiple times. It was premiered for his 50th birthday celebration in 1915. It was a 4-movement symphony, and it was like his Fourth Symphony that preceded, quite intense, and there was a lot of bitonality where he'd write music in 2 different keys at the same time. It was very exploratory, very progressive, which is what the world was going through in the 19-teens. Composers were questioning tonality, writing atonal music. seeing, what else is out there? How can we express ourselves? How do we leave this romantic era where everything is lush and beautiful and memorable tunes and catchy things? And the original version of the Fifth Symphony was very, very crunchy, is a way I would describe it. Lots of clashing sounds and harmonies that are very abrasive. He ended up editing this piece, the symphony, Fifth Symphony, after the premiere. He edited it 2 times. The third revision, which was premiered in 1919, is the one we perform. Basically, everyone performs today. That's what we will be performing for all of you. And he takes what was originally a 4-movement symphony and he combines it into 3 in this final revision, which is fascinating. He sort of bridges what was originally the first 2 movements in the original version into 1 movement. And the piece is just so breathtakingly beautiful and original. The first movement starts very slow, this beautiful horn call, very tranquil. I think these allusions to the sounds of nature, to what it feels like to be surrounded, to be in solitude and just surrounded by trees and birds, you can really feel that in this opening of this symphony. A characteristic that is in Sibelius's music that he's kind of known for is a way of writing, especially for the strings, where he often has them playing tremolos very, very fast, or sometimes it's measured out into 8th notes or 16th notes, but they're repeating notes quite rapidly, and it's very quiet, but it's technical. They're changing. They might do the same note for a bar and a half, and then one pitch up, and then it goes back down, and then up. And it's these subtle gradations, these subtle shifts that are really meant to just kind of be felt. It's not supposed to be front and center. There's almost always a longer lyrical melody in a woodwind or brass instrument somewhere else in the orchestra that's playing over that has more prominence. But there's this sort of unsettling quality, this searching quality. I like to always describe it as kind of that, maybe the sensation you get when you are going for a walk and maybe you've gone for a walk in the woods, and maybe it's a place or a park you're very familiar with, but the sun has just started setting and things look a little different and you can't remember, have I already been here? Did I just go in circles? I feel like I recognize that tree. Didn't we see that boulder like 20 minutes ago? And there's a nervousness to it. The music kind of gets it stuck in these little loops. And then just when you feel like it can't get any more anxious, things open up and there's this beautiful, expansive quality to the music, and you hear a gorgeous, breathtakingly beautiful melody come out, and it's just like, oh my goodness, you see home, you see that where you've been heading this whole time. His music has that sensation. This first movement has that. Something I want to point out in particular, sort of take a closer look at, is that he writes something that's very difficult, very unique. Basically, the last several minutes of the first movement of this Fifth Symphony, he writes that the orchestra needs to do a gradual accelerando. It has to speed up little by little. Now, usually when we have accelerandos and composers are asking in music for things to speed up, it's usually over 4 bars, 8 bars, 12 bars, maybe 16. It's minutes of music. So how do you pace a gradual acceleration? He doesn't delineate clear points through the piece, like, okay, accelerate from here for the next 12 bars, then stay to tempo, and then accelerate again. It just, at one point it says stretto, poco a poco, that it just needs to be speeding up and getting quicker and quicker, al fine, to the very end of the movement. So it's not something you can do if you try and micromanage it as a conductor in a rehearsal and mark and tell the players, okay, this bar we're going to be at this tempo, and here it's going to be this. You can't do it. There has to be this natural quality, just this gradual, very gradual snowballing effect. It's very challenging to do, and it's something that I'll be working with the orchestra with throughout the week for our rehearsals to try and get that to just come together. It's going to be organic, and it's going to be a little different every time, and that's what makes it so challenging, is you can't fully control it, and it's just something so unique, and it's something very special. And when you're listening, you might not even realize it. That's kind of the goal, is you don't realize that it's been just gradually, incrementally getting quicker as the piece progresses. The second movement is a beautiful and very simple piece. There's a plucking pizzicato string accompaniment. Woodwinds are all playing staccato as well. It's sort of a theme and variations. And I heard a really incredible Finnish conductor and someone who's performed and studied the music of Sibelius for decades. Jukka-Pekka Saraste is his name. And I heard an interview with him. He was discussing the symphony. And what I found so fascinating is he said the second movement is such naive music. The melody that you're going to hear is so charming that opens things up. He said that this is very atypical for Finland. Finnish music, the Finnish people, there's a great pride and there's a coolness, is how he describes it, to the Finnish people, to Finnish culture, and to Finnish music. And he said that the theme of the second movement is just about as naive as you could imagine, like children in the Finnish countryside singing a little children's tune or a folk tune is the way to think about it and approach it. And that really changed how I listened to this piece. And I hope that's something you feel too. It's naiveness. It's so beautiful. It also, like the first movement, has moments where he encourages these accelerations, but in this case, it's not all the way to the end. It's in short bursts, and then it goes back to a slower tempo, and then it's quick again, and it speeds up, and then it goes back. But a very, very naive and lovely, rustic kind of country children's song, if you'll call it. The last movement, which is by far the most famous of the three movements of the symphony, is just breathtakingly beautiful. And Sibelius says that he found inspiration. He heard the main melody, which is first introduced in the French horns. He heard this tune when he was out in the countryside and over a pond saw a group of 16 swans flying, and he heard this theme in his head and he wrote it down. I believe he originally said he heard it in the trumpets, the sound of trumpets playing this theme, but when you first hear it, it's in the French horn section. Anyways, the strings have this manic, searching kind of high intensity opening for the symphony, but then quickly things open up and you hear this beautiful, noble fanfare in the French horns, which is eventually we'll get past to the trumpets. You hear it all through the orchestra, but it's just breathtakingly gorgeous music. I think one of the greatest melodies ever written in the symphonic canon. It's so special, it's so spectacular. And the piece keeps going, right? The third movement starts really fast, but the end of it is very slow. I can't spoil the ending. It is one of the most unique endings ever written in any symphony. I can't spoil it. It doesn't end when you think it is. And for those of you attending one of our performances, I will encourage you, and I will say at the performances as well, wait until my arms fully go down to my sides before clapping, because it will fool you. And we want the charm and the uniqueness of this very special ending to carry the full weight it deserves. You are going to love it. If you haven't heard this piece, there's really nothing like it. It's sensational. And it's just such a special way to close out this really charming, diverse, and beautiful program. Once again, I can't wait to see all of you April 5th and 6th at the Hemmons Cultural Center for this concert. It's gonna be a special one. See you there.